Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be giving my recap as well as my final review, I guess, and some advice for running the Alien role-playing game scenario Destroyer of Worlds. So this is a cinematic scenario, meaning that it comes with pre-generated characters. Each character has their own personal agenda, many of which conflict with other party members' personal agendas. And it's expected that there's going to be a little bit of shenanigans going on between players by the end, as well as a fairly high body count. This adventure does have, or scenario, I really shouldn't be calling it adventure. I guess that's just the D&D side of me coming out. But this scenario does feature, I think it's 5 playable characters, as well as an assortment of NPCs that can be used for fill-in player characters if the body count starts to get a little too high. So the setup for this is that the scenario takes place on the planet of, or the moon, I guess, of, I guess the planet is 61 Cygni, and you're on, I think it's LV-038, which is this moon colony that was initially established as an oil refinery, sort of like the whole city and everything was built around the rich oil deposits that were found on this moon. However, Weyland-Yutani ended up purchasing the equipment, ended up purchasing basically the town or the city that this takes place in, and converted it from sort of an independently owned and operated oil refinery into essentially a military installation. The old refinery was shut down and decommissioned, and everything was routed to go through the brand new Fort Nebraska, which became the central hub for everything else on this moon. Now, political tensions are pretty high in this scenario, and at this point in time, the Union of Progressive Peoples, also known as the Space Communists, are at war with the United Americas and the Three World Empire, which are heavily supported by companies like Weyland-Yutani, as they're trying to get away from the more capitalist and company-dependent governments for one that's supposed to focus more on like the needs of the people and returning the colony back to sort of what it was. At this point, very few people still remain on this colony or on this moon, and the fort itself is stripped down to a skeleton crew, with it being more of a staging point for an offensive that's about to take place. Now, before the player characters are sent off with their detachments to go to war with the UPP, they are all pulled aside, all from different units and different detachments, as they are sort of meant to be the best of the best, and are called upon to do a mission which involves tracking down and bringing in 4 former Marines that have gone AWOL while stealing important information or important documents or important undefined objects from the military that the United Americas do not want falling into the hands of the UPP. So the player characters assemble, they're given their briefing, and they're essentially sent out into the nearby sort of oil town or oil refinery town. There's like oil pipelines going all throughout. There's buildings kind of scattered throughout them. It's a very like kind of depressing place. The moon orbits this gas giant, this blue gas giant. I don't know if there's a good picture of it in here, but we'll take a look and see if there is. You can kind of see it there, actually. So you've got this like blue gas giant with this giant storm that's kind of like Jupiter's big red dot, except it's a big blue dot that's referred to as the Eye of Oblivion. And the first place that the players actually went to when I was running this was the Oblivion Bar. A bar that's got its name based off the Eye of Oblivion, with the moon being tidally locked, and in sort of like a synchronous rotation with this gas giant, meaning that this location is always facing towards the Eye of Oblivion. Again, a very cheerful place. When the players arrive, they attempt to be sort of low-key, although they don't necessarily do the best job of it. But they do end up getting some information from the locals by a little bit of sweet talking, a little bit of intimidation, and I think there was even an arm wrestling contest. It's been a few months since I started the scenario, so a lot of the early details are a little bit on the fuzzy side, but essentially what they learned is that the four AWOLs were here, and they met with a known UPP recruiter, who I believe is this guy here, though I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's this guy here. And the meeting did not go well, with the AWOLs and the recruiter sort of getting into a bit of a shouting match, with the recruiter flat out leaving, and then the AWOLs sort of leaving the bar at separate times. It is known that one of them was arrested and sent to the Marshal station for drunk and disorderly. It's also known that a couple of others were attacked by UPP insurgents and found their way to the local medical facility, where one of them ended up sort of just getting up and leaving, and nobody knows exactly what happened to them. And then the fourth individual also just sort of disappeared without anybody really knowing what was happening. Their time in the bar did draw some APP insurgent attention, and when the players left, there was a short-term firefight, which resulted in the player characters getting a pretty handy victory through the use of their pulse rifles and pistols and a couple of grenades, courtesy of Dante, who is sort of the heavy weapons specialist of the group. Dante in this adventure also went through quite a bit of physical trauma, suffering several, major injuries. None of them were in themselves necessarily life-threatening, except for one that was treated, and through a use of, medical drugs and stims and things of that nature, was able to make it almost to the end of the scenario, but not quite. Now, it is important to note also that each of these characters have their own personal agenda, and it's going to come into play with the first place that the player characters went to after the bar, which was the Marshal station. It was geographically the closest location that they had to the bar, so it made the most sense to go there first. While they were there, they did see a street preacher who was preaching from a book known as Star Beast, which was written by Morse, the surviving inmate from Alien 3, as he was sort of telling the story of, the messenger of God that came down and brought with them this beast of tribulation and all these things. It was sort of an interesting interaction with some of the players engaging with that individual. That other individual also ended up, getting the crap beat out of them by non-believers sort of afterwards. But anyway, in the Marshal station themselves, the characters did find, I believe it was Reese. Yeah, they found the insurgent Reese, who had been locked up for drunk and disorderly, and they were trying to get him released. They go into his jail cell to see that he is sort of laying on the bed with his back turned to the door itself. And when they enter, they see that when they roll him over, he is very much dead, as you can see here by his character information card, with him having given birth to a chest burster. As it turns out, Fort Nebraska is not only a military base, but it also has a secret sublevel where Weyland-Yutani is experimenting with the black goo from Prometheus and Alien Covenant, and creating something called Project Life Force, which created xenomorphs, an alien queen who laid eggs, and several of these individuals, actually all of the insurgents, had been face-hugged, and that's what caused them to, leave and become AWOL. They also did receive inoculations for the face-hugging that occurred, which were meant to kill the embryo inside of them. Unfortunately for Reese, his was unsuccessful, but we'll sort of touch with the other characters here as time goes on. Now, when I mentioned the personal agendas, one of the players was playing Chaplain, a bishop synthetic who is, pretty much meant to be like a bishop character. His name is Chaplain because he idolizes Charlie Chaplin, and even has like a fake mustache and like a bowler hat that I think he can wear to impersonate him at times, to try to, lighten the tension, so to speak. However, he is also being occupied by another synthetic intelligence by the name of JL. And JL is controlling Chaplain at the beginning of the scenario, with Chaplain or JL's objective to be to eliminate any proof of the Project Life Force, which created the xenomorph. So when the characters defeated the xenomorph drone that burst out of Reese, Chaplin, you wanted to use their computer system to send a message back to the base. While he was doing that, however, he was also triggering and suppressing the alarm for the automatic fire suppression system, which in this case seals all the exits and entrances and then removes all the oxygen from the building, which would suffocate the fire but also suffocate anybody that was inside at the time. Now, normally you would have like an alarm system that would give you a certain period of time to vacate through one of the emergency exits. However, that alarm was actually deactivated, and with his results for his Comtech role, he was able to do all this in half the time that it would normally take, as well as to cover his tracks, so nobody knew what he was doing. So after they left, shortly thereafter, everything locked down, all the air got pulled out of the building, and it killed all the remaining marshals that were inside. He also rigged the natural gas tank that was outside to explode in the middle of this, like after this firefight broke out with more insurgents. He ended up like sabotaging it, so after they left, so shortly thereafter, everything would sort of explode and destroy the building and destroy any of the physical evidence. The next place that the player characters went to was the medical facility, where two of the insurgents were taken, which I believe was Wojcik and Carvalho. So these two individuals here. Carvalho was beaten up pretty badly. Wojcik took Carvalho to the medical facility. However, she started feeling off herself and ended up just kind of wandering away, where she was picked up by a group of insurgents. Carvalho was in the medical bay, in one of the surgical bays, where he was going to be seen to by the doctor. Now, when the group gets there, they do discuss things with the doctor, and they arrive just as Carvalho's chest burster bursts. So once again, we've got a situation where a xenomorph was set free, although this time it was a chest burster which escaped into one of the air ducts, and the players weren't able to fight it. However, once again, Chaplin had to deal with the situation, and so while the players were going and looking for different bits of supplies and equipment that they might be able to use, I want to say that Chaplin disposed of the doctor and hid the body. I could be wrong on that, but that's kind of how I remember it happening. But yeah, anyway, Chaplin was trying to cover as many steps as he could to make sure that nothing was exposed that would reflect poorly on Weyland-Yutani. So now we've got 2 of the 4 AWOLs defeated. Sergeant Wright, they would discover, was actually taken by a group of insurgents and learned of where they were holding out, which was the abandoned old oil refinery. The first one that was created before a new one was built, where the Fort Nebraska military base would sort of be built around. And while they were there, the players created a bit of a ruckus. Wright escaped her captors, but was gunned down before she was able to reach the player characters. Now, Wright also received the inoculation. However, unlike Reese and Carvalho, who both had their xenomorphs within them reach full growth and burst out, killing them, Wright's was actually killed and is now just this dead face, or this dead embryo inside of her chest. However, she fears that it didn't work, and she expects to have this thing burst out of her at any point in time. However, it actually didn't. While they were at the refinery and having defeated the insurgents there, they did discover the location of their main compound, the insurgent compound, which led to Fort Nebraska launching an attack on the compound. So multiple Marines were dispatched there, and the player characters were actually airdropped onto the roof of the insurgent compound. When they entered the compound through the skylight, they found the building inside to be eerily quiet. Not a sound of alarm or anybody really moving around at first, which is odd because there was the cries of alarm and gunfire and explosions happening all around outside. The silence was broken by a horrified, blood-curdling scream that was cut off at its height, and a limp, crumpled, lifeless body of one of the UPP insurgents being thrown from one of the bedrooms, from the master bedroom, and hitting the wall on the opposite side of the hallway. Going in, the characters discovered the final insurgent, Wojak here, and something was not right with her. She was found in a nest that was made of slain UPP insurgents and arranged around like a nest that she was sitting in the middle of. And while the other two had their chest bursters simply emerge like normal, and Wright having the inoculation successfully kill the xenomorph inside of her, Wojak was a little bit different, where the inoculation actually caused a mutation within her that essentially absorbed the xenomorph embryo and had it sort of take over her entire being. So this created, I believe, what was called a blood burster or a body burster. I forget which terminology they use for this one. But basically, the full grown xenomorph is inside of her skin, causing her to go insane and gain supernatural strength. And when the player characters actually enter, they see her in her final stages of emerging as this like body, I think it was body burster. And what happens is like the eyes fall out of the eye sockets and roll across the floor. She then grabbed the back of her head, but instead of like just holding it in pain, she actually grabbed the back of her hair and actually split her flesh in two, causing the alien crest that was deforming underneath of it to finally emerge before all of the skin just rips apart. Kind of like a Mortal Kombat fatality, if you remember like Shiva's fatality from Mortal Kombat 3, where she just pulls your skin off. It was kind of like that, but inside of this like 5.5 foot tall woman was a 7 foot tall or near 8 feet tall unique xenomorph, which doesn't have like the eyeless dome like the rest of them does, but you can actually see her skull at the front of this alien dome, this alien crest, with the empty eye sockets. And it was pretty horrific. Like the writing that they used to describe the scene was absolutely horrific. But they're able to deal with her, and all four of the AWOLs are now KIA and are now all accounted for. Right before the Union of Progressive Peoples launched their assault on the planet and on the Fort Nebraska with aerial bombardments and things like that. And that brings us into Act 2. So Act 2 is all about the characters trying to get back to Fort Nebraska, where they had been recalled to when the attack began, dealing with UPP soldiers that have landed, including a assortment of David model synthetics, which include like an entire like battalion of these Union Progressive Peoples soldiers that have landed and begun attacking, as well as just other regular soldiers. They do find the bartender from Oblivion Bar, who has been protecting the United America loyalists, because the players on their way before they encountered her did come across a scene where United America loyalists were being lined up and executed outside. So she was trying to protect them. The players fend off an attack from a group of UPP soldiers. They call in an airlift to bring all of these survivors to the fort. However, it's getting in a vehicle in an alien movie, or like it's like getting into a helicopter in like a zombie movie or something. It's just not going to work. And an anti-aircraft round hits the ship, causing it to crash and killing everybody on board, except for, unfortunately, just the player characters. Now, as this happened and as they emerge from the debris of the crashed ship, they see this shadow, this ominous shadow in the clouds above the fort, or above the city, and it drops these canisters, which midair kind of explode into this like black cloud. So something has unleashed an aerial bombardment of the black goo pathogen from Prometheus and Covenant, kind of like when David arrived on the Engineer homeworld, which wasn't an Engineer homeworld, by the way, just a planet that they had also created life on, or at least that's what people are saying, and I hope that's true. But anyway, he unleashed it there, and it's kind of the same thing. It hit near the fort itself, but for miles out, it still had some effects. So even though the player characters are still quite a ways away from the Fort Nebraska, they still had to like make rolls. I think it was what's it called, endurance rolls to avoid being infected by the black goo. I should also mention at this point that Dante's character, in addition to the other injuries that he had suffered, also realizes that at some point before the scenario began, he had been taken down to sublevel 3, where he was also implanted with an alien embryo, and the only way to remove it is to get to the sublevel 3 in the base and perform a surgical operation or take the inoculations, whichever they decide to do. But they need to go back to the base for that anyway. Now, that was Act 2, and that was pretty short, and I'll explain that in a moment. But then Act 3 involved the player characters forming an unlikely alliance with a group of David synthetics that just want to get off the planet at this point because everything's gone completely pear-shaped with this black goo pathogen creating these abominations that are roaming everywhere, attacking on sight. And it was pretty brutal. The characters made their last run towards the base. There were 7 of these David model synthetics, including Davyevich, or whatever his name was, which is sort of like the named character. He was the only one of the synthetics that actually made it to the base. And I kind of just explained that as they were running or as they were going, they would be attacked, and some of the synthetics would remain behind to let the rest of them go, sort of thing. And then the player characters reached the base. Now, the base itself had been hit by some of the aerial bombardment from the UPP at the beginning of Act 2, or the end of Act 1, however you want to describe it. And the easiest way for them to get to sublevel 3 was reading high concentrations of radiation. The base's power was also off, and it was also set into an emergency lockdown mode. So, to get everything to the point where they could reach sublevel 3 and have everything be usable, they had to, 1, get the power going back to the base, which means they had to go back into the power core, which is where all this radiation was coming from. So the players were being exposed to radiation while trying to make this repair. Then they had to get back up to the second level of the base to access the Apollo mainframe system to shut down the lockdown protocol, which would allow access to the rest of the base, because all the doors were automatically locked and couldn't be opened without a high level clearance card, which none of the player characters had, and the only individuals that do have it are scattered throughout the fort, but the players weren't spending that much time looking around because Dante was getting close to this thing bursting out of him, and they needed to get to sublevel 3. Now, it's in this attempt to get the power generator back online that Chaplin, along with the other synthetic, the David synthetic Davyevich, ended up being killed by a xenomorph that was inside of the power core, sacrificing themselves so the human characters had a chance to escape. When they finally reset the lockdown protocols, they do manage to get down to sublevel 3, where they are able to use one of the medical pods to successfully extract the xenomorph from inside of Dante. And Dante was able to survive that procedure, though he didn't last much longer in terms of the actual scenario. While this was going on, they were attacked by a xenomorph, with sections of the fort being sort of turned into an alien hive, with the resin secreted in different areas, causing, there to be just issues with xenomorphs being able to stealthily move around. So this one attacked while the procedure was going on. The characters were able to escape, and their only means of leaving the planet relied on the space elevator that is located in the base, with the opening, the airlock to it, being currently open on sublevel 3, so they needed to access it through sublevel 3 anyway. But they need to ride the space elevator up to this orbital platform where there was still one UA ship that was still space-worthy enough to get them out of there. So they had to get to this space elevator, climb it, and then, which is miles high, and then, move onto this platform in orbit. So, we're talking no atmosphere at this point. And making it to this ship that's sort of set up on this platform. Inside of the space elevator, however, on the lowest level where the players enter, is where the the Weyland-Yutani agents and their paid for military brass were trying to evacuate their Planet Life or Project Life Force research, which was actually like a queen xenomorph, which ended up breaking free, killing a bunch of folks, and then setting up their hive center inside of the space elevator with a bunch of alien soldiers and a bunch of facehuggers. And it's here where we rapid fire lose quite a few characters. Dante finally meets his demise here. Nathaniel Hammer, I think, meets his demise here as well as he gets facehugged. And you had Captain Silva along with, I forget who the last one was at this point, but we only had 2 characters left. So unfortunately, the player playing Dante had to sit out the last little bit here. I think it was Iona. I think it was like it was Iona and Captain Silva. With they kill some of the soldiers, or one of the soldiers actually ends up killing itself to spray acid over a group of the player characters as well. But they make their way up to the second level of this 3-level space elevator, where the acid from it wasn't the acid, where the captain drops down a bunch of grenades onto the first level, which causes it to explode, causes quite a bit of damage, and causes some explosive decompression as this thing is leaving the atmosphere here. So you get like the air being sucked out, the characters needing to hold on to prevent themselves from also being pulled out, as well as at this point the queen is also trying to like burst her way from the lowest level up to the top level. They do reach the top of the space elevator. They are able to put on EVA suits that allow them to go onto the platform itself with their magnetic boots, but the queen burst out, she burst out from the lower level and actually climbed over and comes up on top of this platform between the characters and the final ship. So Captain Silva sacrifices herself to allow, I think it was Iona, I could be wrong, but it was the last remaining soldier to run past the queen while the queen is ripping Silva apart, and he manages to make their escape on this ship and is able to read the closing dialogue. So this was a really cool scenario. It was very Aliens, but it's a combination of like Aliens and Prometheus, whereas the other scenario that I ran, the Chariot of the Gods, was a lot of Alien kind of mixed with like Alien Covenant, I think, a little bit, because you had like the spores and stuff like that. So this was a really fun scenario to run through, and it was really dicey. Like the character stress levels were getting so high that one of the characters actually suffered a permanent mental trauma that gave him a severe phobia of facehuggers, which ended up being like his demise anyway. So, there you kind of have it. But yeah, this scenario does a really good job of capturing the feel of the movies. And one of the things that I find that these do really, really well is their pacing. Their pacing is very much like the movies, where it's kind of a slow build in the beginning. And with the characters being Marines here, like you get to let them be kind of badasses for a bit. They're gunning down insurgents, they're taking care of single xenomorphs pretty handily, although there was some injuries that did take place there. But for the most part, like they're pretty well equipped and pretty tough to take down at the beginning of this scenario. Like they're just mowing through their enemies and kind of reaching that point of supreme confidence that we saw the Marines have in Aliens, until they reach the final act where everything just absolutely goes, like I said, pear-shaped, and you've got people dropping left, right, and center. So it really captures the feel of the movie really well. The pacing is incredible, and the writer here, Andrew E.C. Gaska, he's written novels, I think, for the Alien universe as well, and man, he absolutely gets it. Like these scenarios that he has written would make far better movies than a lot of the Alien movies that have come out. I did like Romulus. I liked Romulus quite a bit. I would still put it, below the original trilogy. But I did enjoy that. But when you compare this to like Prometheus and Covenant, for example, these scenarios take the concepts introduced in those movies and not only make them like be logical and make sense within the world, but they're just executed so well, right? It's just so well done. And if you are a fan of the Alien movies and you want to capture that feeling, then these cinematic scenarios are 100% the way to go. Now, I have run this scenario. I just finished running it. I kind of explained what happened here. So I do have some piece of advice for running this particular scenario, just based off of like my experiences with it. The first one is to, again, let Act 1 kind of be a slow burn. Like let the players let them be the badasses that they're expected to be, being colonial marines, right? Let them kind of throw their weight around, let them sort of be intimidating to the citizens there. It doesn't necessarily have to be without consequences, because again, their kind of heavy-handed approach to getting information from Oblivion Bar did lead to a firefight with UPP insurgents. But they just let them kind of be these powerful soldiers, and let them kind of build that degree of confidence, right? Like Act 1 was probably the singularly longest acts of the entire adventure or scenario. I guess I really shouldn't be using the term adventure, but it was the longest of the three acts in this scenario that when I was running it. The players got to do a lot of role playing early on. They got to establish their characters and kind of connect with them. And they got to be these ultimate soldiers that were just going and gunning things down. And, it seemed like they accomplished their goal pretty handily before everything hits the fan. Now, for Act 2, honestly, I would have Act 2 be the shortest of the acts that you run. And it was kind of the same way with the Destroyer of Worlds, where I found like the second act was by design kind of the shortest of the three. And again, I think that works really well because you've got the invasion of the UPP, but you don't necessarily want to draw it out, because Act 3 is where things really get serious and really ramp up. So with these scenarios, like they don't necessarily give you just fully fleshed out, everything is completely designed the way that it's supposed to be. They do give like descriptions and what creatures or encounters you might find there, but the way that these adventures are scenarios, I really got to stop saying adventures, but the way that these scenarios are really structured is they are structured around events. So each act will have a series of events for you to run. Some of them are listed as mandatory, so you do need to use them. Other ones are not necessarily, but like the storm, for example, this one was mandatory. This is when the invasion begins. This is where like Chaplin is freed from from jail's influence. But you've got sort of all of these different things that you can run here. But my recommendation is to only pick like 2 or 3 of them to actually do that aren't mandatory, and then and then do like the mandatory ones, which usually bookend the scenario here or each act. And then Act 3 doesn't actually have a ton of events to it. There's a few here, and I did have like the synthetics trying to make a deal, although it wasn't with like one of the Weyland-Yutanis. Oh no, here it is. It was the White Flag. The Who Hunts the Hunters. I think I used that one. Anyway, just don't feel like you have to incorporate all of these events, because that's a really easy trap to fall into. And I would say, for the most part, with Act 1, you can run pretty much the majority of them, because you want to establish the characters and you want to give them this sense of like accomplishment and almost this sense of invincibility. But with Act 2, I would say only run about, besides the mandatory events, only pick like 2 or 3 of the ones that you want to run the most and throw those in there. And then for Act 3, again, this is where they're fighting a large group of xenomorphs. This is where they're sort of in like the hive, so to speak. So again, you don't have to run every single event, but pick the few that you want. But I would say make the third act a little bit longer than the second act, but not extremely. So I would say instead of 2 or 3 events, because they do have to do a few like story objectives, like reactivate the power core, as well as shut down the lockdown protocol from Apollo. So those are two things that they have to do on top of the other, events that you might want to run. So where the second act, I would say pick 2 or 3 of your favorite, events to run. For this one, I would say pick 3 or 4 because there's those 2 major story elements, and then there's the final sort of like escape sequence for this scenario. So I'm not going to tell you which ones to pick. But just like, don't feel like you need to run every single event because that's really going to draw things out and it's not good for the pacing, right? Like I said, Act 1, long sort of, the longest of the 3 acts. The players are at the height of their power, height of their abilities. They should feel near indestructible by the end of it. The second act would be the shortest one because, it is, they're kind of getting into like these firefights with the UPP, but they're trying to make their way back to the fort, which is like the big like story element there of them reaching the fort from wherever they are. And you don't want to draw that out too long, right? Because that's going to start to feel like they're just never going to get there. And then the third act, they're exploring the base to try to make their ultimate escape there. And there's enough stuff for them to do that, again, you don't want to run too many events, but you want to make sure that you do include enough to keep things interesting, right? So, like I said, I had a xenomorph kind of stalking them throughout the when they first arrived, and then it attacked when they were down in the power core. They also had to deal with the a xenomorph attacking while Dante was having the chest burster removed from him, and the chest burster was trying to escape as well. So you kind of had that happening, and then like the events with the space elevator. So yeah, Act 1, run as much as you want there. Like really let the players establish themselves there. Act 2, 2 to 3 events, and then Act 4, in addition to the story things that they have to do to escape. 3 to 4 events, but leave it at that and don't feel like you have to run everything. But yeah, the alien scenarios, the cinematic scenarios are so well done. They so capture the spirit of the movies in ways that I wish a lot of the modern movies would have done as well. But yeah, it's just such a refreshing, change of pace with these alien products to really feel like they belong in the alien universe. And you can see these being events that would make for great movies, like the issue with Fort Nebraska, right? And the AWOLs and the experimentation, the UPP attacking only for this unknown force to drop the accelerant on the planet itself. Like that would make for a great movie, in my opinion. Probably a better movie than like what we ended up getting with Covenant and Prometheus. But yeah, they just do a really great job. And I am taking a bit of a break from running the alien cinematic scenarios. I do feel like these are best done kind of used a little bit sparingly. Like I wouldn't want to go from one to the next to the next. I do feel like you do need kind of a chance to like recollect yourself, try something else for a little bit, and then come back to it. But I will be running Heart of Darkness as well for my 3-person alien group, and I'm really looking forward to that as well because that one has kind of some strong Alien 3 vibes going in there as well. So Chariot of the Gods was very much like Alien meets Covenant. This one is a lot like Aliens meets Prometheus. And you have the Heart of Darkness, which feels a lot like Alien 3 with a little bit of Covenant and Prometheus kind of sprinkled in there as well. So I'm really looking forward to it. But let me know in the comments below, have you run the Alien role-playing game? Have you run the cinematic scenarios? If so, what were your thoughts and feelings on it? How did it go? How did Destroyer Worlds go for you? Did the players that survive pretty handily throughout the entire scenario, or was it kind of like mine where they started dropping like flies once they got into like the xenomorph hive at the end? Anyway, thank you all so very much for watching. I also want to thank Free League because Free League actually did send me this scenario. I guess I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the video. I did mention it in my like unboxing video that I've already done, but they sent this to me along with the starter set. And, oh man, like this was just such a good time. So I want to thank them for that. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to watch this video. It really does mean a lot to me, and I will catch you in the next one. Until then, take care.